Okay, great. All right, good morning, everyone. Um, we are this morning delighted to welcome a guest speaker, Gabe Mays, who is the head of the WordPress division of GoDaddy. And he's agreed to join us this morning and just talk a little bit about GoDaddy and their telecommuting experience here in the era of COVID. Good morning, Gabe.
Hey, Robin. Good to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. So Gabe, so I think most people have heard of GoDaddy, but I'm not sure we all know kind of everything that GoDaddy does. So if you wouldn't mind starting us off with a little bit of an overview of what GoDaddy does, and maybe tell us maybe something about the company that maybe people might not know.
Sure. So GoDaddy started as a domain registrar in the late '90s. Had a lot of Super Bowl commercials, which you may remember. But now we've kind of pivoted to just helping small businesses thrive online. So we have our domain products, our hosting products, email marketing, pretty much anything that a business needs to thrive online. That's what we do today. Some things that you may not know, we're the largest domain registrar in the world. So you have, robin.com. That's a domain. We sell those. We're also the largest web host in the world and the largest WordPress host in the world, which is what I lead.
Great. How many people work at GoDaddy?
We're around 10,000 right now. Most of those are kind of support sales, and the rest are what we call T&C, which is technical and corporate. Those are engineers, product managers, corporate, things like that.
And where are they physically located?
Everywhere. So we have about 14 offices around the world. My team is even from mostly in the United States, but I also have people in Europe and Asia. So we're pretty distributed organization.
And where is the local office? There's a Boston area one, correct?
Yep, it's in Kendall Square in Cambridge. That's technically where I'm located. Not at this moment, but that's where my office is. We're one Main Street, right on the Charles there. So if you go over the Longfellow Bridge, we're that big building right there.
Nice location. So Gabe, tell us a little bit about what you do at GoDaddy.
Sure. So my title is head of WordPress, which is purposely vague, just because I run all things WordPress. So WordPress is it's called a CMS, a content management system. It's what you use to run websites. 2/3 of all websites run on WordPress, so it's quite large. So my team manages everything from the hosting, which is our essentially servers. We have data centers with servers that run all the websites, to all of the, you can call them onboarding tools or site building tools. So you have certain plugins, things that you use to build websites. We manage those as well.
Okay, and how big is your team?
It's probably about 100 if you factor in all the people that actually work on it. But I primarily manage the engineering and the product teams that actually build the products. Then we have people who support them and market them and all that.
Okay, great. We're going to talk a little bit about remote work today. And I know that you work from the Cape because you're here with us at Cape Space, and we thank you for that. But tell us a little pre-COVID. Tell us a little bit about what the company's attitude was towards remote work. Was there an institutionalized policy of any kind, and how did you come to be, to do your GoDaddy job here on Cape?
Sure. So there really wasn't a remote policy. It was kind of like differed by team. When I joined GoDaddy, it was kind of a weird situation because my wife, she was selected for the Blue Angels, which is they travel 300 days a year. So I saw that as an opportunity to kind of do something else. So I joined GoDaddy and I had to be in person. So I moved to Arizona to do that in 2015. Then as I started building my team, the team ended up being remote. So then I ended up going remote. We moved to Florida. Then when my wife left active duty, we moved back here to the Cape, which is where she's from. I was able to go remote because my team was remote and my manager was okay with it at that time. But most GoDaddy employees were in offices. That's just how they typically worked up until the COVID crisis. So that was kind of an interesting exercise for us where people could work from home for most jobs like mine, but it wasn't typical. Moving the whole 10,000 person company remote in a few weeks was a bit of was hard, because we have a bunch of sales and support people which have desktop setups and things like that. But we made it happen, and I think it's easier for some than others. But now we have a full remote policy, so the only people who are in the office are the people who have to be, and those are largely in our data centers, running all the machines and hardware and things like that.
Yeah, so to talk a little bit more about that, because I've been fascinated to see enormous companies with hundreds of thousands of employees go from a traditional office setting to everybody's working from home almost overnight. And that's not an easy thing, right? I mean, everybody thinks, you just go home and log onto your computer. But talk a little bit more about what the company had to, what processes and resources they had to provide, and what the psychological effect was on the employees.
Yeah, that's a good question. So teams like mine that are TNC, as long as you have VPN access, you're pretty much okay because you work with certain systems. We recently beefed up our VPN, so it's kind of a zero trust network where regardless of where you are, you're securely logged in. We were already using Slack. We were already using things like Office 365 or Google Drive and Zoom. So it was a pretty easy transition for my team. But for our teams that were more kind of support or sales related, where they had setups, we essentially had to get all those employees computers, and monitors to kind of work from home. So that was a bit, CapEx intensive, but we had some of that on site, so that was a bit easier.
So how many desktop setups did your IT department have to obtain and configure in how many days?
So I don't know about obtaining because we had some already, but probably about 7,000-ish overall.
Wow.
Just because you typically have shifts, but now everybody has to have one, So that was probably within just a couple of weeks. So they really did a great job at that.
And did they ship them to the employees, or did the employees come and get them?
Yeah, because all those employees were already in the office, so they just went to their local office to kind of get those setups and stuff.
Okay.
And it's to your second question, is working pretty well. Teams like mine are remote native. Like we've been doing this for a decade, and there's no real problems there. I think the people who do have problems are maybe a different generation, not in age, but just in how they've worked. Where there's kind of more, they're used to having people around, right? And they go to the office for that social aspect, and they don't have that anymore. And also people who are struggling because daycares are closed and they have kids running around and they have nowhere to go,
So the CEO of Morgan Stanley was interviewed and quoted in the news a couple of weeks ago, and he said that they have 90% of their workforce working remotely, and they're actually very surprised to see how almost seamless it has been. And they're feeling that, they may never go back to the idea of having all employees working in corporate headquarters again. What is GoDaddy's senior management feeling about how this experiment is working, and what they might be thinking for this reopening phase and beyond into the new normal, if I can use that overused phrase?
Yeah, so a lot of tech companies are doing that, which is great. Like Shopify is now fully remote. I think Twitter did the same thing. Facebook is moving that way. Google through the end of the year is going remote. For us, we're staying remote at least through the end of Q3 that we've heard so far. It could go permanently. I think the company is kind of surprised at how well it's working. There are some things that aren't working as well, just because like if you have small sales teams, they kind of thrive on certain environments, but that's kind of a minority of cases. But yeah, I think the company is pretty surprised at how well it's working, and we're looking at extending that in the future. It's just kind of working through all the minutiae of that.
As an employee in a big company, how have you felt about how the company's rollout of these new policies has been? Has the communication been effective and clear? Are the employees feeling supported, out there on their own?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been really impressed by our company's response. Like our CEO even has weekly office hours where people kind of ask questions and we get things resolved, especially at the beginning. So it's been really great. Our HR people ops have been great at responding to individual needs. Some people have a harder time than others just because they have to take care of their kids and work. So it's kind of a weird situation. But they've been really supportive. I've been really impressed by it.
That's great. Um, what are the primary tools, tech tools that you're using? You mentioned Slack. Um, are you a Zoom shop? Or are you using another teleconferencing tool? And are there any other tools that you're finding to be, super valuable in this new phase?
Yeah, I think the three most important are Zoom, Slack, which is great for communities and kind of keeping a connection with people with asynchronous communication, and then Google Drive, right? Google Drive or Office 365, some way to kind of virtually share docs. Those three are probably the three most important. Then you have different ones based on how the teams work. For example, ours uses GitHub a lot because we have a lot of engineers that share code and collaborate and things like that. But Zoom, Slack, and O365 or Google Suite are the three main ones to kind of start moving that direction.
Okay. If I can ask you to try to think globally for a minute, what do you think are the long-term implications of this remote work shift for the tech industry in general?
Well, it's kind of a catalyst because I think trends that would have taken 10 years to happen are accelerating. That's probably the biggest change. And you can see that in Shopify's numbers, our numbers, Netflix, like all these companies that kind of serve online businesses or serve content from home that kind of replace doing things in real life are really accelerating. So seeing those trends really take off is interesting. That's the biggest change I think we'll see. Um, the other one is hard to tell because, everything's about trade-offs. We can stay locked down forever, and accept certain, economic impacts, or we can not and maybe accept certain health impacts potentially. So it'll be interesting to see kind of where we as a society settle on that spectrum. And there's no right or wrong. It's just a matter of what we want to do, and I think we'll start to see some more further impacts from there because I think a lot of us today are still in this temporary phase where we don't know how long it's going to be, but depending on what the knock-on effects are, we'll see more things unfold. So.
And what have you, how has GoDaddy's core business been affected? We're all being affected different ways. I mean, obviously, if you're somebody like a restaurant, you've been, hit hard. And, there are certain kinds of businesses, lawyers and accountants, for example, that really haven't missed a beat. How has GoDaddy's business changed, if at all?
It's done better just because we help people do well online and people are moving more online, especially retail. So we've seen business better. It's bittersweet, but due to the nature of our business, we've seen it do well.
And are you seeing what you mentioned about your company, just or about the industry in general? Having things accelerated that would have taken years to happen previously, happening much more quickly. Are you seeing that with GoDaddy clients, that people are becoming more tech savvy and more willing to use their websites and immerse themselves in the technology than you would have seen before?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're kind of seeing capability clash with reality because they're still as tech savvy as they were, which is not very tech savvy, but they're running into having to be tech savvy, right? And having to figure out, how do I sell with Facebook Live, and how do I sell online, and how do I accept invoices, and oh, I can't take checks anymore because some businesses still only take checks, and it's been interesting to kind of see that clash. I think we're seeing businesses who can make that transition and those who are struggling. But
what
yeah,
do you think is what do you think has been the biggest change for you personally?
The last few weeks having to work from my wife's shop because I like being here at K-Space. I'm very productive here, but I've had to kind of shift there, and we've had to figure out daycare for my kid. That's been the biggest, I'd say, challenge. but work-wise, things haven't really changed. My whole team has been remote. I typically speak at more conferences, or I see them at least every month. I don't see them anymore, but since we're remote native, it hasn't really impacted things that much.
Okay. And since you brought up your wife, I think I'm going to two things. First of all, let you talk. Give her a plug for her shop. I'm sure people would like to hear about that. But before you do that, you mentioned earlier, I made a note. Did you say that your wife used to work for the Blue Angels?
Yeah, yeah.
Can you just
So
tell us about it? It's not completely off topic, but it's interesting.
yeah, we were both in the Marine Corps. I got out in 2013, but she stayed in. And then in 2014, she was selected to be number 8 on the Blue Angels. So that's when we moved to Pensacola, and she, performed with the team for 2
She
years.
she was actually a pilot.
hmm Yeah,
Wow.
it was the best 2 years of our life, just because there's a show every weekend, Hawaii, Alaska, wherever. Being remote worked because I could work and go to all the shows with her. It was the best 2 years. It was a lot of fun.
That is something about you that I did not know. That is fascinating. So how did she, so she went from the Blue Angels to opening a gift shop on Cape Cod. Tell us a little about that.
Yeah, so she, her whole time in the Marine Corps, she's flown F-18s, which are fighter jets. It's really fun, but it's a lot of, you're always gone, and we wanted to
Yeah,
start a
I
family
hope
because,
so.
yeah, because we've been married for 12 years. At that time, 10 years, we didn't have kids because we were just too busy. So we wanted to make a change. So she left active duty. We moved back here, same street where she grew up on, in Marston's Mills, where her shop is. And yeah, she wanted to come back home, and I'm here too. So
And just give us a little bit about Plum Porch.
yeah, so she bought the Plum Porch with her sister from Dina, the owner, in 2017, and it's a gift shop and a dress boutique in Marston's Mills. And they're closed right now just because retail's closed, but they're doing Facebook Lives and things like that on their Facebook page. So great
Great.
shop.
All right. Well, Gabe, before we open this up to questions, are there any final thoughts that you'd like to share with us?
I guess I would just say that even if you think you'll go back to the old normal, if that's a valid phrase now, I would say try to get your teams used to using Slack, Zoom, and something like Google Docs or Office 365, just to kind of, one, it's better. It makes your business more resilient because you have that asynchronous communication. Things are stored in the cloud. But if anything happens, you kind of have that to kind of fall back on if you need to. It's a good muscle to work on.
Okay, great. Gabe, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I am going to stand down now and turn it over to Bert, who will help moderate some questions from the audience.
Great.
Thank you, Robin. Gabe, that was fabulous. Thanks so much. So let us know your questions. Either raise your hand, and Eldon.
Oh, yes. First of all, Robin, I think I heard a possible speaker at the First Fridays on the technology of flying in the Blue Angels.
Good idea, Eldon.
But Gabe, I'm interested in the management aspects, a couple of management aspects of the remote teams. I've worked remotely as a software developer for over a decade now, largely because as you get older, they'll pay you to develop software, but they won't pay you to manage remote teams anymore. Yeah, part of it, in my experience, has been that it works because I build up a relationship of trust with the folks I work with before I went remote. So the first question is, how do people build up that kind of relationship, to get started in this whole thing? Is it the same as it used to be for hiring somebody to do software, or is it different?
That's a good question. It depends on the person. So when I started at GoDaddy, I lived on location in the office. I went into the office for the first 18 months, and that helped me build relationships. But since I left, all of our new employees have been remote only. That has worked because the people we hired were used to remote. They've been remote for the last 10, 15 years. So that that was easier because they are used to having remote relationships, where if you have somebody who's used to kind of having the in-person relationship, it may be harder to transition. So in this specific case, it was just kind of easier because of the nature of the person that we hired, if that makes sense. I do not have experience hiring somebody who's used to being in the office for a remote role right off the bat. That's something I haven't had to worry about yet.
The second part, if I may, is yeah, how do you manage the work? Do you have productivity standards? How do you monitor that? What techniques do you use?
I think if you look at if you think of remote work, there's like a pyramid, you know, where the lowest level is the job has to be done on location, and the highest level is you're actually more productive remote than any on-site team. So you tend to develop practices and a level of trust that you don't have to worry about those things. Because if I have an employee where I have to worry about what they're doing, like they won't be my employee. You know, it's a very high trust thing. And they have to be able to perform with those standards on their own. There's a lot of autonomy involved, and that's a certain kind of person. You know, but that's just never something I worry about. You know, I have weekly check-ins, one-on-ones with my managers, but I don't worry about things too much. They just perform, and they perform really well. I don't really have any metrics that I look at, you know, but maybe that's just the nature of the work that we do, you know. I'm not worried about them performing day to day, as long as they hit their, you know, delivery dates or whatever they're working on. Does that help?
Sure, thanks. Yes. It's very similar to the way I work with my client.
Does anybody else have a question for Gabe?
I have one actually that wasn't on my list. Gabe, you know, we had a speaker last year who talked about a different phenomenon going on in the world, a non-COVID phenomenon called the skills gap, which is about you know, hundreds of thousands of unfilled tech jobs in the world, and a perception that the talent to fill those jobs is not there and that the gap is growing. Could you just talk a little bit about what you're seeing at GoDaddy in terms of inability or ability to fill tech roles, and how that may have changed at all with COVID?
Yeah, so I'll start with the second part first because it's easier. I think not being geographically located has definitely made it easier to fill certain roles. But even though we're remote first, we still have certain boundaries. Like we generally hire for our team in the US just because of time zones, right? Working with somebody in Japan and somebody in Europe is hard to do with one team. So we tend to restrict teams to time zones just so it's more effective. The skills gap is definitely real. I mean, I think you'd be very surprised how long a good role that pays maybe $150,000 a year is open because you can't find somebody to fill it. You know, just because the way that technology is fragmented, there tends to be like very narrow skill gaps that is really hard to fill for. Like you can't have typically, like for example, we have some roles that with technologies that have only been around for 2 years, and it's hard to find people that kind of meet those certain roles. I do think the skill gap is hard. I think people need to transition to more problem-solving mindsets and creativity and working with people, and it's kind of hard to get all those skills in one head, you know. So we definitely do feel the skills gap in some areas more than others. Does that answer the question? Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely.
Brian.
Bert, I think there's one in the chat.
Yep. Brian, do you want to articulate that question?
Sure. I guess my question is around remote working has very different dynamics when everybody's remote versus one person's remote and you've got a single office that's together. So I've got a lot of experiences in being a partner in a management consultancy where every time you're landing a team, you have a tendency to have that kind of a mix. But I'm wondering what you see or what you're thinking or what your experience is with any leading practices for techniques to have people feel connected. Again, there's different pressures on the remotee than there is those they're connecting to. So are there good exercises? Are there good sharing techniques? I mean, what thoughts do you have, or what suggestions do you have?
That's the hardest environment, right? When you have some people in office and some people not, and you have those hallway conversations, and this person wasn't included. You know,
Right.
it's a big challenge. People feel left out. The people in person tend to get promoted faster just because they have that connection. What we've done is we tend to, I don't want to say force, because it just happens, but all communication happens on Slack. Like you'll see two people sitting next to each other in the office and they're slacking, right? It sounds ridiculous, but when there's conversations that other people need to hear, like that's kind of what has to happen.
When you say Slack, it's a similar technology to just Skype chat, or Teams has a chat. Are you talking chat in general, or does Slack do something that much different?
At a meta level, it's the same. It's different in that Teams and Skype suck and Slack doesn't. You know, just to be very honest, like Slack is amazing. It's way better than Teams. We even as a company tried Teams and then moved the whole company back to Slack, right? Because Teams is nice because it's integrated, but Slack is just better. It's just it's more native, and then it's just a communication app. You can actually start using it for free, you know.
Okay.
And then upgrade to a paid plan if you want, but it's the best place for asynchronous communication, for building communities. Even like meetup groups have Slack teams, right? Just to kind of build a community. But we tend to try to naturally just have communications go on in Slack channels for that team, so everybody can kind of see it. So that Slack channel becomes the hallway.
Okay. I mean, but are there actually, I think it's to the advantage right now of the remote worker. Right now, when everybody's remote, everybody's on an even playing field. So when we start to have new normal, as you just pointed out, the remote worker, it'd just be interesting to see whether or not there are suggestions and techniques for how to make sure the remote workers are feeling productive and connected.
Yeah, that's hard. I mean, I'm not an expert in team dynamics, you know. All I know is that we facilitate it by having conversations in Slack, you know. But at the end of the day, I think it's like, you know, when you have cars and like you can set this side of the car to, you know, 80 degrees and this side of the car to 60 degrees,
Right.
but like the air is like not, you know, separating itself. There's always going to be that kind of mix, you know. I think there's no way to completely eliminate that if it's a lopsided, you know, asymmetric relationship. So.
Great.
I don't know if that helps.
Yeah. So Jennifer and then Elaine.
I just wanted to say thank you to Gabriel for your point about the time to have learned to use these tools like Teams or Slack was before. You know, I know that I'm struggling quite a bit with, we use Teams. I've made myself up to date on it. I got some training with our, you know, Teams expert at the institution I work at. But I'm struggling with, you know, I'm working with people who are saying they can't even find Teams on their computers. So never mind, you know, so I'm posting all our files, I'm chatting with them, and it's just going out and they literally can't find it. So I'm just encouraging them to have the one-on-one training sessions, but it's been super hard. And I'm mad as an institution that we didn't start using that tool really in a robust way prior to the pandemic, because now I just feel like we're in the Wild West, and I mean, I'm having to just email files back and forth. So I know that once we get back in person, if we are ever able to, that one of the biggest things for me will be, I will be doing a Teams training, because it's the tool we have like immediately with my folks, because I can't even get on it with them to show them how to use it. It's been beyond frustrating. So yeah, that's a really good point, I think, for all of us, is that we have to start using these tools. I mean, there's no way getting around it, for sure.
I'd say, Jennifer, just a quick thought, and maybe at some point we can kind of do a shared practices, even around, and I would appreciate that Teams, Jira, DevOps, I mean, there's all sorts of different tools for storing things. I've had some recent experiences where we've been pretty productive with Teams, and I'm not saying any one of them is the end all and the be all, but I'd be happy to share some of those thoughts with you. And if we want to, you know, kind of have a birds of a feather kind of a session, there might be some things that we can collaborate on to create a little bit of leading practices. But just being one thing that's effective that we found within Teams, when you have a recurring meeting, a chat discussion and where you save files get associated with the meeting. So if you're wondering where it is, just go back to the last meeting invite and you get directed right into the folder structure. So like any of these tools, you can tailor them to, you know, how it best supports a good percentage of your workload. And I don't know if Slack is more than chat, but if it is, I see the link in here, I'll take a look at it. But as I say, I offer a little bit of maybe a combined birds of a feather at some point where we can just chat about what worked, what hasn't worked. And I'd love to learn from you all as well.
One thing to watch out for is as teams who are used to working in person move to these remote tools, they tend to directly translate one for one what they were doing in the office to these remote tools. And that's like, that's like the formative phase, but the goal is having to get past that. It's like, what do this medium uniquely allow us to do, so we're not just having the same meetings on Zoom and wasting everybody's day, right? Because you can be more productive. It's just, it takes people time to kind of get native, but if they can't even figure out how to send a message, they're probably a long ways off from that. Just to be,
that's true. But I mean, there's a lot of conversations that I'll have during the day where I'll ping somebody on Teams. It used to be Skype, and we engage in a quick phone call, and then we'll share a screen. And, so sometimes the integration is helpful, which it does emulate, what you might have done shoulder to shoulder in an office. But I think that's what you're really trying to speed up is emulation of that, sitting next to each other at the same desk or table.
Oh, I'd say emulation of it is the middle step, where the step to get to is how are we more productive remote than not. But here's the thing, like, our businesses are different, right? If you're doing consulting, that's a lot different than what I'm doing, which is building products, so which is a lot different than civil engineering and I need AutoCAD or something, right? So
I code PowerPoint and spreadsheets.
Okay.
Jen,
Elaine, you have a question.
just a thought. I didn't know if you could do like a Zoom call and do a screen sharing, record it, and then sort of just have that as a training of how to do some of the stuff so that you don't have to keep doing that.
Yes, absolutely. Actually, the first step is, though, I'm bringing my staff new laptops. So we're going to start there. So I'm driving to Attleboro and Mansfield on Sunday to deliver to their homes laptops, because I'm sick of them saying they don't have a camera. And like, they call into meetings and then they're seeing me, but they can't chat and there's echo. So we're like in kindergarten with my staff, and they're older, they're late adopters. But yes, once we get them their laptops, I plan on doing that. Thank you.
Yeah, to the note in the chat. So Zoom is great. I think Slack has a built-in screen share functionality, but it's on a higher plan. I typically recommend people use the free plan of Slack, which keeps only 10,000 message history, then use something like Zoom just to keep them separate. Because if you want to talk with somebody really quick, you can just type /Zoom in Slack, and it'll automatically open up a Zoom meeting, and you can see who's on there and stuff. So there's different integrations like that.
Great. Elaine, you had a comment, I believe.
I think he really just answered it with that comment, but I was asking if there was a free version of Slack. I mean, I'm a high school teacher, and we had to, with AP classes, so we had to turn it right around. And I've been on Teams all year long, and I'm one of the people who can't find it. I've been on Teams literally all year with Microsoft. We have a Microsoft mentor for one of our projects, and the girls are great. Like my senior girls, they're like, "Where's Miss Griggs? Let's start without her. She can't find Teams." And I'm not bad with technology at all. I teach computer science, but Teams has been the bane of my existence. So thank you for mentioning Slack.
Yeah, it's nice because it has an app and all that. Oh, sorry. Somebody say something?
Elaine, do you have Google Classroom?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because there are a whole bunch of Google tools that work better if everyone's on Google already.
Oh, yeah. I use it. I've just had it in my mind, like, oh, there must be something better. There must be something I'm missing. I mean, I'm getting everything accomplished with Google tools, but the whole Teams thing has just, well, and not to take the floor, but it's like, I mean, I've been in technology for a while. I've been writing software since I was 18, and I'm old. But when Hotmail first came out, and I was in biotech consulting, people would send me, I was like, oh, I'm sorry, I can't do Hotmail for some reason. This is how I feel with Teams. You have to send it to me and then I'll reply. because I was doing hotmale.com for a long time.
No, we've been using Slack for years. The integrations are great. It's Teams was built after that, but it's a Microsoft product, so the UX is going to be bad, you know. But it's just nice, all the integrations. You share a Google Doc, it actually shows the doc in there, it saves docs, it just, the way it ties everything together is great.
Okay. Any other questions?
Bert, I think Angela has a comment, but Angela, before you go, I have to jump off. So I just want to say thanks again to Gabe for joining us this morning, and bye everybody, and I hope we see you next week.
Thanks, Robin. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Robin.
So thank you very much for all of this information. It's great. I have been a GoDaddy user for years, and one of those, I'm like I buy URLs like a drunken sailor, like all of these products and all these things. And being in technology, I oftentimes will, especially when people, because they'll come to you and they'll say, hey, I need a website, or hey, I need this. I'm always sending them to GoDaddy. Their customer service is outstanding, and they just help that really basic user as well, which is, it's a great product. So I wanted to comment on, because you, with your Slack and with some of the other items that people had said, I as well, I mean, I've worked remotely, offsite in some capacity for 15 years. And I also find Teams not to be that useful. Again, I agreed with you with Microsoft. It's not very intuitive. And I find it actually even has some conflict with some of the other products I use. And so I was in a Google Classroom or Google Hangouts meeting, and I couldn't get my camera on because I had just had Zoom, because I had just had like it was a nightmare. But what I wanted to say was, someone had made a comment about maybe going through and talking about some of these tools at a later date. And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, how it's sort of it's a marriage of all of them in between. So it might be a nice idea, and you seem like a good person for it, to volunteer you, of putting together for the Tech Council, maybe something along the lines of the software and what the software is replacing from the in-person interaction. So I find that we're all getting zoomed out, and we think, well, why are we getting zoomed out? I mean, we're getting work done. And for me personally, the people that I'm used to working with that have worked online for a long time, they're not having 100 Zoom meetings with me, because they're used to using Slack or Discord or chat or whatever and having these conversations. But working with a lot of the municipalities, they're used to in-person. So I'm finding that everyone's calling a Zoom meeting for those conversations that you would have had if you just popped your head in someone's door and asked them a question real quick. And that's really what Slack does, is it's those pop your head in the door. It's those, you're sitting there and someone comes up and talks to Gabriel and I overhear it, and therefore I take in the knowledge of their conversation that I wasn't in. So maybe like putting something like, you know, kind of almost like a comparison chart. Do you follow? Like where you've got, you know, the in-person, your project meetings would still happen on these platforms. Your day-to-day communications would happen on, you know, Slack or Discord. Your training, like Jen had mentioned, some options that could be used, like the Screencast-O-Matic or some of the other software. Maybe putting together a helpful list like that for everyone to kind of be ahead of the game of what they should use to replace it, instead of right now everyone trying to use Zoom to replace everything. Does that make sense?
Oh, that makes a lot of sense, and I think it's true, because when you use Zoom, you're still synchronous, right? You're still taking, you know, n minutes of my day, and I only have, you know, n minutes like total of the day, right? So it's just where asynchronous kind of helps it a lot. Yeah, that could be helpful.
All right, well, Gabe, thanks so much for all of this. This was a lot of great information. Actually, I just have one quick question. This is a WordPress question. I think I read somewhere that since the pandemic started, that attacks are up about 37%. Can you address that and anything that you're doing at GoDaddy to combat that? And maybe anything for us WordPress users to be doing?
Yeah, well, the most important things for security are, one is update your plugins and themes, right? Just because those incorporate security updates, update the core software. Then don't use the same password for every site. Like your membership for justinbieber.com or mine in this case, it shouldn't be the same as your bank information. It shouldn't be the same as your Amazon login, just because if they get one, they have them all. So those are the two most important things. People tend to target things that have the economy of scale. So if I can hit WordPress, which covers 2/3 of the internet, and more people are doing stuff online, it's a higher ROI for me. So that's why we're seeing more attacks up. I don't think we'll ever get past that, as people do more online. But yeah, if you're specifically using WordPress, use a unique password, update your plugins and themes, and don't leave it as a on a post-it note on your corner of your screen. Are good practices.
Great.
Bert, can I jump in, or do you want to call it?
One last question. Go ahead, Eldon.
It's really a question in a way for a bunch of people that jumping up a few thousand feet. What does this say about marketing the Cape? I love working remotely from Cape Cod. Yeah, and it seems to me that there's some reasons, like people that work remotely in these fields can afford the houses we have here. That it should be promoted more, and maybe even a census of how many people work remotely here. Do we have any? Is there any movement that anyone hears about to do that kind of thing?
If you look in the chat, I just shared a link to tulsaremote.com. That's a program that municipality did to promote remote workers coming to the Cape. So that's something that the Cape could do as one example to promote it.
Great, thank you. Good question, Eldon. I think that's something certainly that Open Cape is working on. And I was actually, my previous meeting was with the Cape Cod Climate Change Collaborative. And one of the ways to reduce emissions is to have people drive less to work. So having remote work is part of that.
Is when